So it's not about your chronological age as much as your psychological age. And the question is how are you going to turn that into your opportunity? The topic today is it's never too late. Now you might think, well, what does that have to do with anything? What is that meaning of that? So I'm going to start with a story and then I'll build content for you. So if you want to write some notes, that would probably be to your advantage. When I was 16 years old, I was living on the north shore of Oahu and I was a surfer. And I had just come in surfing in Haleiwa on the north shore. And it was a good sized day, big day. And I came in to rinse my hair off and wash in the outside shower. And I looked out and there was a gentleman named Lord Blair who was 65 years old surfing and ripping the surf, just doing an amazing job with a lady named Becky Benson who was about my age. And they're out ripping the surf and I was thinking, wow, that's amazing. A 65-year-old guy out there just cranking on the surf. And I remember saying to myself, God, when I'm 65, I'm going to come and surf the North Shore of Oahu, which is where I was. Well, at age 65, which is 3 years ago, I was on the North Shore and I had the opportunity to surf the North Shore. I surfed there right next to the pipeline, famous pipeline surf. And it was not a huge day, but it was a great day. And I got to fulfill a dream. And so at 65, I was out there surfing. Now, when I was paddling out, even though my physical body probably looked from other perspective, much older, I felt like I was 17, 18 years old, 16 years old again as I was paddling out. I didn't have any reference to time or age at the moment. So the point that I'm making in this little intro story is that there's a chronological age, you know, how long you've lived. There's a biological age, is what's inside your head. And so that has a lot to do with what you're going to do in your life, how you perceive things as far as time. Now, I went and did a little research on some things and found some interesting things here. I had the opportunity when I was a number of years back to meet with a gentleman named Freeman Dyson. He passed away earlier in the year, at 97 years old. He was at the Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton, was one of the brightest individuals. He took over Albert Einstein's office in 1955 until he passed away. One of the brightest men in the world. But 97 years old, he was still researching and doing his job and doing presentations. So he wasn't too old to do something extraordinary. I have another friend, now that was in the intellectual work. I have another friend named Bill Pollack, who is in his 90s and runs a massive corporation called Drake International. He founded it. He told me one night at a dinner, and he said, you know, in 1951, when I started the company, the last day I ever worked, because I'm doing something I love to do. And he was a vital guy in his 90s, still is. So here's somebody that's done something amazing. Then there's a guy named Mike Fremont, who is a 100-year-old marathon runner. And he's still cranking out. So there's physical, there's business, there's intellectual, people out there doing extraordinary things. There's a guy named Paul Biya, who's 89, is president of Cameroon. And of course, the Queen just passed away at 97, and she was running a major world global enterprise, the queendom, if you will, the kingdom. And the Dalai Lama is 87. So at what age is old? Yeah, I used to think that 65 was old. Now that I'm older than 65, I look back and it seems more young. Martha Stewart, Home Shoppers Network, at 50, she started that. Home Depot, Bernie Marcus, I believe his name is, started at 50. McDonald's was started at 50. He was 52. KFC was 62. They found out that there's 2.8 times more likelihood of success and achievement if you start later in life than if you start younger. Leo Goodwin created Geico at 50. Wally Bloom at Denali Flavors, 50. Huffington Post, Adriana Huffington started at 55. So my point is that no matter what the age is, you're never too late. But you can go the other direction. You could go real young. I have a young boy that started learning my methods at age 9 and is now 20, and he's a major consultant. And he started at 9. He came to my Demartini method training program and learning the method when he was 9, 10 years old. And he was out there. I had another client of mine that was on the front cover of Vogue magazine at 15 and had an empire, a fashion empire by 15. Started another one also when she was at her young age. She was 11. She had her own fashion company. 11. Another girl that ended up signing a deal with Disney at 14 years old that I met was a student starting at 9. So it goes the other direction too. I mean, you could start at a very young age and all of a sudden do something extraordinary with your life if you got clear about what it is. Or maybe you get clear about something that's really inspiring to you at a ripe age. But age really doesn't really matter. It's your perception, decisions, and actions that matter. How do you perceive your environment? Now, some people come to me in the breakthrough experience, which is my signature program that I do, and they say, well, am I too old to start something? I said, how old are you? Well, I'm 46. And I said, I don't know. You tell me. What makes you think that's old? Well, I'm already halfway through my life. And I said, well, I know for myself that some of the greatest achievements I did was after my 50s. So even after 60s, I've gotten some things done. So I don't know if that has anything to do with anything. So the one thing you want to ask yourself, whatever your age is, how is my age specifically giving me more advantage and disadvantage? What's the upside and the advantage I have for being my age? If you ask that question, you might surprise yourself. You might all of a sudden find out that whatever it is to your advantage. I know that when I was first opening up my practice years ago, I mean, this is like the first week. So in the practice, there was nobody there. It was me in the office by myself. I didn't have my assistant only worked Monday through Friday, and I was in there Saturday because I was, just in case somebody would come by, I was ready to work. And a guy comes in the office and he says, yes, I'd like to see the doctor, please. And I'm standing there in a white coat with my name, doctor, on front of it, but I decided I was going to turn around in a circle and come back and greet him. Said, yes, I'm Dr. Demartini. He says, that's funny, yeah, but I'd really like to see the doctor now. And I was 27 years old, and he goes, I said, well, I am the doctor. And he goes, yeah, that's funny. He didn't believe it. He thought I was too young. And I thought, wow, that's great. That has an advantage. Maybe to my advantage, people may not believe it, that I can do something at a young age. But the reality is, that's when you graduate. You graduated at about that age from professional school. So people sometimes don't do it. But the reality is, if you're young, you've got advantages. If you're old, you also got advantages. I've hired people very young. They have enthusiasm and energy, and I've hired people that are more mature, and they've got skill, and they've got diligence, and they've got reliability. So there's advantages no matter what the age. And I've certainly had the opportunity to meet some amazing people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, even in the 100 mark, and interview them. And some of them are just absolutely amazing. They're doing amazing things at even ripe ages. So it's not about your chronological age as much as your psychological age. And the question is how are you going to turn that into your opportunity? And you may have fears, but remember, fear is also a friend. When I analyze when people have fear of something, and I break it down what their fear is, we can define fear as the assumption that you're about to experience more drawbacks and benefits, more negatives and positives, more losses and gains, more disadvantages and advantages from something happening to you in the future, right? It's your anticipation of something that's going to be more drawbacks and benefits. But what's interesting is that's always accompanied by its opposite, a fantasy of having more advantage than disadvantage. Imagine this. I'd like you to take a little magnet on one side, put positive and put negative on the other, or philia and phobia. The positive is the assumption that you're about to have more positives and negatives in the future. That's a philia. You have philic or fantasizing about the future, infatuated with the future. And phobic is where you're assuming there's more drawbacks and benefits of the future. And that's a phobia. That's a fear. The fear and the fantasies are all pairs of opposites. So if you imagine if you meet somebody and you're infatuated with them and you're fantasizing about the future and think, oh, there's going to be more positives and negatives with them, you're actually going to have the fear of loss of that individual. You fear the loss of that which you seek and have an infatuation with. And you also, if you have more drawbacks and benefits assuming, and you have a phobia, you also fantasize escaping it. So you never have one without the other. There's no philia without phobia because you're going to fear the loss of it. And there's no phobia without philia because you're going to desire to escape that. So they come in pairs. And whenever you're having some sort of a imbalanced perspective that immobilizes you or hypermobilizes you, that's because of these imbalanced perspectives, which is one of the reasons I do the breakthrough experience. The breakthrough experience, in there, I talk about how important it is to live by your highest value. Now, let me elaborate on why, and that's related to this topic. Because when you're living in, everybody has a set of priorities in their life, and whenever they're living in their highest priority, their highest value, their blood glucose and oxygen goes into the forebrain. The forebrain is involved with more objective perspectives. Objectivity means more neutral and balanced in perspective. And as a result of it, you're not fearing the loss of something you're seeking or not fearing the gain of something you're trying to avoid. And you're more resilient and adaptable and present, and therefore more likely to take a spontaneous action to accomplish something. But the second you allow yourself to go into lower values because you're trying to please people on the outside instead of live according to your own highest value, you automatically go into the amygdala. The blood glucose and oxygen goes into the subcortical amygdala, and that wants to avoid pain and seek pleasure, and it polarizes instead of neutralizes. It polarizes your emotions, and now if you seek something, you fear its loss, and if you try to avoid something, you fear its gain. So now you're immobilized by phobias and fantasies, and breeding that, it's a survival mentality. And then what happens is you tend to, in those states, you tend to be more vulnerable to the idea, what about my age? And there's these series of fears that people have. The fear of not knowing enough or not being smart enough or intelligent enough to pull something off at a certain age. The fear of not succeeding at it, the fear you might fail at it. Again, imbalanced perspective. So if you're not living by your highest values, you're more vulnerable to these states. The fear of the loss of money or not making money can do that, can cause it. The fear of losing loved ones or the respect of loved ones can do that. The fear of rejection or not fitting into the group will immobilize you. The fear of ill health, death, or disease, or the fear you don't have the vitality or looks. I've seen people that think, well, I'm 50 years old, I don't have the beauty I once had, so they're now they're fearing the marketplace and thinking, well, I can't go out into the marketplace. And then you also have the fear of breaking the morals and ethics of some spiritual authority, some moral hypocrisy that you've indoctrinated yourself with. All those fears are a result of the fantasies of one that go with it. So if you have a fantasy of doing success, you have the fear of loss of it, the fear of failure. If you have a fantasy of knowing something, you have the fear of not knowing something. All those are basically the pairs of opposites I just mentioned. And they are all symptoms of not living by highest value. That's why in the Breakthrough Experience program, I go through and I determine what your hierarchy of values are, and we make sure you structure your life according to what's really valuable to you and liberate yourself from the things that aren't, because you're more likely to be resilient, adaptable, neutral, objective, less phobias and fantasies, less distractions, less amygdala responses, and more likely to take spontaneous actions to achieve, regardless of age. And by the way, in that state, you're more present. And when you're present, you're not thinking and comparing yourself to the past or future. You're more likely to just get into action. But the second you're not doing what's highest in priority in life, not living by highest values, and you're down into lower values, you automatically get the amygdala on. When you do, you can become polarized. When you do, you subjectively bias yourself and misinterpret your world out there. You over-exaggerate the positives and the negatives. You create the fear of loss or the fear of gain. You now become immobilized. Now, as a result of that, you have uncertainty. The uncertainty makes you come up with excuses and false attribution biases. The reason why I can't do it is because of this or that. And then you hold yourself back from achieving. And that's why I put in the Breakthrough Experience the Demartini method. The Demartini method is to dissolve those. Anytime you're not living by your highest value and living congruently and inspired like that, and you're down into the amygdala, that's a science on how to get back into the highest priorities again. It's a science on how to dissolve the baggage, the phobias, the philias, the fantasies, the nightmares, the prides, the shames, the infatuation, resentments, all the emotional baggage that weighs people down and immobilizes them from their dreams. So I'm a firm believer in making sure that you live by priority if you want to go and have resiliency and want to be able to not let your age interfere with your actions. Like I said, there's people out there doing extraordinary things at all young or old age. I had a girl that was in my Melbourne, Australia breakthrough many years ago, and she was 6 when she first came to the program. Her father brought her there, but that's normally not that young when you normally have them a little older than that. But she came, and I could barely see her in the back because we had a large audience and she was way in the back. But her father was there, and I could see him. And then the following year she came back, but this time at the end of the year, she said, "You inspired me last year, and I wrote my first book." And I was 7 years old. She came up and she handed me this book. It was called Start. Her name was Misha Solaria. And she had this book. So I did a little commercial for it. I went on the social media and I went and did a commercial for this book because I thought, what an amazing accomplishment. 7 years old, got her first book out. By the time she was 9, she had her second. By the time she was 12, she had her third book out. She was a professional speaker already and was already deputy mayor of Melbourne, Australia, and was involving in education. It was amazing what this girl was doing. And here she was, young, and all the people that were coming up with excuses why they weren't doing things. Here's an example of somebody who just got into action. She got clear about her highest values. She learned the Demartini method I teach in the breakthrough experience. She learned how to apply that and dissolve emotions. She went in there and started to prioritize her action, and she just went out and achieved. So I'm a firm believer that if they really, 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 really have a high value on something, the hows will take care of themselves, and you won't let age stop you from doing something. And if you're inspired by it, I don't think, as Deepak used to say, a timeless mind is an ageless body. If you're really, really present with something and really focused on something and it's deeply meaningful and you're really present. As a gentleman who was a guy that wrote a book called One Up on Wall Street, Peter Lynch. He was with Fidelity Investments, Magellan Fund, I think. And he basically said, when I go out and do the quantitative analysis and technical analysis before I buy stock, I get an idea of what stocks I'm going to pick, and then what I do is I narrow it down, and then I go and visit the actual headquarters of where these companies are. And he says, I'm looking for 6 things, 4 main ones, but 2 additional ones. Number 1 is I'm looking for people who are grateful for their job. Number 2, I'm looking for somebody who loves what they're doing. Number 3, I'm looking for somebody who's inspired by the vision. 4 is enthused in their working. They're enthused about working and doing their service. Next one is they're certain about the skills. And the last one is they're present when they're working. They're present with whoever they're working with. Those are all signs of living according to your highest values. Those are all signs of a timeless mind and ageless body. When I say it's never too late, there's absolutely nothing stopping people from getting in that state. In the breakthrough experience every week, when I give people the Demartini method, I start them out when they have all the emotions, and then they're coming up with their excuses, and then we go through that method, and when they're done, they're back on priority, and they're in that state. And they have what I call the transcendental feelings: gratitude, love, inspiration, enthusiasm, certainty, and presence. And in that state, time has nothing to do with it. Age has nothing to do with it. Clarity. In fact, what's interesting is when they found out in the studies of the brain, they had a thing they called episodic memory. And they found out that with every episodic memory, which is the past, there was simultaneously a future going on. Now, William James, over 125 years ago, wrote about that. There's never a memory without imagination. And I remember reading that way back, and I didn't quite understand what he was saying. I thought that means you whenever you have an imagination, something, you have a little bit of memory in it. Whenever you tweak it a bit with your imagination. That was my first assumption. But what it really meant is that the mind is a homeostat with what is called temporal entanglement, and it's actually keeping your mind present. And if you're living by your highest value, it becomes present. And if you don't, you live in your lower values, it starts to become skewed, and you start to live in past and future, and you end up with aging because you have the arrow of time and entropy and breakdown. So the second you live by priority, the second you dissolve the baggage with something like the Demartini method, and you become present, in that moment, you're not even aware of your age relative to these things. There's no excuses. So it's never too late to take action. It's never too late to prioritize your life. It's never too late to learn the method and dissolve all the baggage that keeps you from being present, to achieve more in your life, whatever that may be, whether it's raising a beautiful family, whether it's running a major business, whether it's going out and doing an intellectual pursuit and being a scholar, whether it being a spiritual quest and meditating and on a mountain somewhere, or whether it's physical fitness, social contribution, or raising a magnificent family. Whatever it may be that's true for you, what's highest on your value authentically, that's where you're going to get your most power and presence. And that's where you're going to, when you're doing that, you're not going to be thinking about your age. You're going to be thinking about what your mission is. I always say those with a mission have a message and a vision, and those are timeless. You don't even think about it in the future, it's now. And as many people, Eckhart Tolle and others have talked about the now, I've got a science on how to help you stay there and get into that state. So if you're interested in learning that, come to the Breakthrough Experience. The Breakthrough Experience is my signature program that I've been doing for many, many years now. I've done it 1,156 times, about to do it again this weekend. And I'm very inspired to share the tools that I've been putting together for 50 years of research to help people dissolve the baggage, get present, prioritize their life, and go out and get into those 6 transcendentals. So they're grateful for their life, doing what they love, inspired by what they do, enthused, and basically certain and present. If that's of interest to you, come and join me at the Breakthrough Experience. And know that no matter what your age is, that is on the way, not in the way. Ask, how is it helping you fulfill your mission in life? I look forward to making a difference in your life and teaching all the tools that I've been learning for 50 years and save you from having to reinvent the wheel.